Hello and welcome. The power of birth itself can fuel the darkest of magics. And on one fateful night in the year 1297 Dale Reckoning, that power would reshape the hierarchy of an entire city. Deep beneath the surface world, where stone remembers secrets older than empires and darkness holds dominion over all things, a child drew his first breath while his family waged war upon their rivals. You find yourself drawn into this story, not as an observer, but as someone who will walk alongside a soul caught between two worlds, experiencing every triumph and every heartbreak as if they were your own. Before we descend into these forbidden histories, please consider subscribing to the channel. It is the surest way to find your path back to our library of lore when you wake. Section 1. Birth in Darkness. The city of Menzoberranzan sprawled across a massive cavern, its buildings carved from stalagmites that had grown for millennia, their surfaces polished to an obsidian sheen that reflected the ambient fairy fire, illuminating the eternal night. House Do'Urden stood as the 10th house in the city's ruthless hierarchy, a position that burned with shame for matron Malice Do'Urden, who hungered for greater power and recognition. To slip even one rank meant disgrace and possible destruction. To rise meant favor from Loth, the Spider Queen, and the sweet taste of victory over rivals who had looked down upon her house for far too long. On the night of Drizzt's birth, matron Malice had planned something unprecedented. The magical energies released during childbirth, particularly the birth of a drow noble, could be channeled and amplified by skilled priestesses. Malice intended to use her child's arrival to fuel an assault on House Dever, the 4th house of Menzoberranzan, whose destruction would allow House Do'Urden to rise dramatically in status and power. The plan required perfect timing, coordination between the birthing chamber and the warriors assaulting Dever's compound, and the kind of ruthless ambition that defined drow society at its most efficient. The infant arrived with eyes already open, a rarity among drow newborns. Those eyes held an unusual quality, lavender rather than the typical red or amber of his people, marking him as different from the moment of his first breath. But Malice had no time to consider her newborn son's peculiarities, for she felt the surge of power flowing from the birth, channeling through her priestesses and across the city to where her warriors fought and died in Dever's halls. By drow law and tradition, Drizzt should have been sacrificed immediately to Loth. As the 3rd son born to matron Malice, his life belonged to the Spider Queen, offered up to prove devotion and secure divine favor. But fate, or perhaps the chaotic nature of drow ambition, intervened in unexpected ways. During the assault on House Dever, Drizzt Do'Urden, Malice's 2nd son, drove his blade through the heart of his older brother Nalfine. The the house wizard and first son. The murder was swift and brutal, conducted in the chaos of battle, where such things could be dismissed as accidents or enemy action. With Nalfinn's death, Drizzt suddenly became the second son rather than the third, and drow law spared second sons from sacrifice. Dinin's act, driven by his own ambitions and desire to advance his position within the house, unknowingly saved his youngest brother's life. When Malice learned what had occurred, she accepted the situation with cold calculation. The sacrifice of Nalfinn, a trained wizard and valuable house member, would satisfy Loth. The newborn Drizzt could live and eventually serve the house as another weapon in their arsenal. The assault on House Dever succeeded beyond Malice's expectations. The power drawn from Drizzt's birth, combined with the element of surprise and superior tactics, allowed House Do'Urden to utterly destroy their target. By dawn, House Dever had been wiped from Menzoberranzan's hierarchy, and House Do'Urden had risen from 10th place to 9th, a dramatic ascent that sent ripples through the city's political landscape. But while the city buzzed with speculation about this sudden shift in power, while rival houses reassessed their positions and alliances, one member of House Do'Urden looked upon the newborn Drizzt with emotions that had no place in drow society. Zaknafin Do'Urden, the house's legendary weapons master, gazed at this child with lavender eyes and felt something he had not experienced in centuries. He felt hope. Zaknafin was already ancient by drow standards, having lived for more than 3 centuries as the finest blade in Menzoberranzan. Warriors spoke his name with respect tinged with fear, for he had slain challengers from every house in the city at one time or another. His reputation as the greatest swordsman in Menzoberranzan remained unchallenged, and even matrons thought twice before crossing him. Yet despite his prowess and the privileges his skill afforded him, Zaknafin harbored a secret that would mean death if discovered. He hated everything his people stood for. The weapons master had never fully embraced Loth's teachings, had never found joy in the cruelty that defined drow culture. He killed because refusal meant death, because survival demanded compromise, but he took no pleasure in the endless cycle of violence and betrayal. For centuries, he had worn a mask of appropriate drow behavior, while his soul withered beneath the weight of actions that contradicted every instinct toward decency he possessed. He had sired children before, watched them grow into the cruel patterns that drow society demanded, and felt nothing but hollow resignation at their transformation into monsters. This time felt different. Perhaps it was exhaustion with his own existence, or perhaps some quality in those unusual lavender eyes. But Zaknafin allowed himself to imagine possibilities that should have been unthinkable. What if this child could be different? What if, somehow, he could be raised to question the cruelty that defined their society? What if one drow could break free from Loth's corrupting influence and discover a better path? These thoughts constituted heresy of the highest order, yet Zaknafine could not suppress them, could not deny the desperate need to save at least one innocent soul from the corruption that claimed every drow child. The years of Drizzt's early childhood passed in deceptive calm. Malice focused on consolidating House Do'Urden's new position, managing alliances, and preparing defenses against rivals who might see their recent rise as threatening. She paid little attention to her youngest son, beyond ensuring he received appropriate education and training. This neglect, which would have devastated most children, became Drizzt's salvation, for it gave Zaknafine opportunity to shape the boy's character during those crucial formative years. The weapons master began the dangerous game of influencing his son's development from the earliest possible moment. He spent hours with young Drizzt, ostensibly teaching him basic coordination and movement skills, but actually speaking to him in soft tones about concepts that had no names in the drow language, because they had no place in drow society. He described honor, compassion, justice, and mercy, painting pictures of a world where strength protected rather than oppressed, where the powerful defended the weak instead of preying upon them. Drizzt absorbed these lessons with eagerness that both thrilled and frightened his father. The boy demonstrated intelligence that developed quickly, asking questions that no drow child should ask. Why did they have to hurt the slaves? Why could people not simply live in peace? Why did the strong always prey upon the weak? These questions earned harsh discipline from other tutors and trainers, but in Zaknafine's presence, they received honest answers that contradicted everything else the child was taught. The internal conflict began early. Drizzt found himself torn between the world as it was presented by his mother, his sisters, and the priestesses of Loth, and the world as it might be according to his father's whispered teachings. He watched his eldest sister, Breeza, practice torture techniques on captured surface dwellers, saw her delight in their screams, and felt his stomach turn with revulsion. He observed how his sister Virna calculated social interactions like a chess master planning moves, always seeking advantage, never offering genuine kindness or connection. He saw Dinan's casual cruelty and Maya's cold ambition, and wondered why such behavior was praised, while his own instincts toward gentleness were punished. Yet Drizzt also learned quickly that expressing such doubts meant severe punishment. He developed the drow art of deception by necessity, learning to wear masks of appropriate cruelty while concealing the doubt that gnawed at his soul. He laughed at the suffering of slaves when others watched, then lay awake at night, troubled by images of their torment. He participated in ritual humiliations that marked drow coming-of-age ceremonies, performed the expected acts of casual violence, and felt pieces of himself withering with each compromise. The training intensified as Drizzt grew older. Zaknafine taught him combat forms and techniques with dedication that bordered on obsession, as if he could somehow protect his son through skill alone, as if being the finest warrior would provide armor against the corruption that claimed every other drow. The boy possessed natural talent that exceeded even his father's gifts, his body moving with fluid grace that made complex techniques seem effortless. His reflexes operated at speeds that left observers struggling to track his movements, and his understanding of tactics and strategy showed sophistication far beyond his years. But more importantly, Zaknafine taught him philosophy disguised as combat instruction. The weapons master spoke of true strength during their training sessions, his blades moving in demonstration even as he explained concepts that had no place in drow society. He told his son that real power was not merely the ability to defeat enemies, but lay in choosing mercy when you could deliver death, in defending those who could not defend themselves, in standing against injustice even when standing alone. These lessons constituted everything Malice and the priestesses of Loth would consider weakness, teaching that ran counter to every principle their goddess demanded. Yet Zaknafine persisted, driven by desperate hope that his son might somehow escape the fate that had claimed him, might find freedom in a world beyond Menzoberranzan's endless cruelty. As Drizzt approached the age when he would enter the academy, the tension in House Do'Urden grew palpable. The academy would attempt to destroy everything Zaknafine had worked to build in his son's character, would employ sophisticated techniques designed to break individualistic thought and crush any spark of independence or moral consideration. The weapons master knew he was sending his son into a crucible that destroyed most who entered it, that reshaped young drow into perfect weapons for their houses. The night before Drizzt's departure, Zaknafine drew his son aside for a conversation he had been dreading and planning in equal measure. They met in a practice chamber deep within the Do'Urden compound, a place where they could speak without fear of being overheard. The weapons master looked at the youth before him, no longer a child, but not yet fully grown, and saw both pride and sorrow reflected in those unusual lavender eyes. Zaknafine warned his son about what awaited him at the academy, explaining how the masters there would try to break him and remake him in the image of every other drow warrior. They would teach that strength meant domination, that mercy equaled weakness, that the only truth was power. The weapons master urged Drizzt not to believe these lessons, but also cautioned against open resistance. the boy needed to learn a deeper game, to hide his true nature behind masks of competence and appropriate cruelty. Drizzt wrestled with the impossible challenge his father described, wondering how he could pretend to be something he was not without actually becoming that thing. How he could participate in the Academy's cruelty without letting it corrupt his soul. Zaknafine counseled him to remember always that he was pretending, to hold tight to what he knew in his heart, even when every voice around him insisted that his heart lied. The boy needed to become skilled enough that the masters could not dismiss him, valuable enough that they would hesitate to destroy him. He must survive, endure, and wait for the moment when he could finally live according to his true nature, rather than the nature others would force upon him. The youth nodded slowly, understanding the enormous challenge his father described. He would spend years at the Academy, surrounded by cruelty and corruption, expected to participate fully in activities that violated every principle Zaknafine had taught him. The prospect seemed overwhelming, yet he also recognized that no alternative existed. Refusal to attend meant death or transformation into a drider. Those horrible spider drow hybrids that served as cautionary examples of what happened to those who disappointed Loth. Drizzt promised his father that he would remember these lessons, that he would survive and remain true to the teachings that had shaped his character. Zaknafine embraced his son, a display of affection that would have shocked any observer. In that moment, the weapon's master allowed himself to believe that perhaps, against all odds, his teachings might take root deeply enough to survive the Academy's corruption. Perhaps this one drow, this child with lavender eyes and a soul that rejected cruelty, might somehow find a path to freedom. The weapon's master shared one final piece of wisdom with his son before they parted. He spoke of the surface world, a realm that existed beyond miles of stone and darkness, where open skies stretched overhead and light banished shadows. The races there would fear and hate any drow they encountered, would judge based on heritage before ever knowing the content of a person's heart. But at least in that distant world, a drow who rejected Loth might find freedom to choose his own path, to define himself by his actions rather than his birth. The concept seemed like fantasy, too distant and impossible to grasp. Yet something in Zaknafine's tone suggested desperate certainty, born from decades of secret yearning. Drizzt absorbed this final lesson, tucking it away in his heart, alongside all the other heresies his father had taught him. He could not imagine circumstances that would drive him to such desperate flight, could not picture himself abandoning his people entirely. Despite all his doubts about drow society, he still believed he might find a way to exist within it, to carve out some small space where he could live according to his own principles, without completely rejecting his heritage. he would learn otherwise. The lessons ahead would be written in blood and betrayal, in horror and heartbreak, until the truth became impossible to deny. There could be no compromise with absolute evil. There could be no peace with a society built upon cruelty. There could be no redemption for those who willingly served the Spider Queen. But that night, on the eve of his departure for Mele Magthyr, Drizzt Do'Urden still harbored hope that somehow, someway, he might bridge the gap between his father's teachings and his people's expectations. He still believed that perhaps he could become strong enough, clever enough, valuable enough to survive, while remaining true to the core of goodness that Zaknafine had nurtured in his soul. The academy awaited, and with it, trials that would test that belief like metal tested in flame, forging a warrior who would one day shake the foundations of drow society itself. The journey from idealistic youth to legendary hero had only just begun, and the path ahead would cost him nearly everything he held dear before delivering him to the freedom his father had promised existed somewhere beyond the darkness. Section 2. The Weapons Master's Legacy. The gates of Mele Magthyr rose before Drizzt like the maw of some enormous predator, carved into the living stone of a massive stalagmite that stretched toward the cavern ceiling high above. Intricate reliefs covered every surface, depicting battles won and enemies destroyed. Drow warriors standing triumphant over the broken bodies of countless foes. Fairy fire traced the outlines of these carvings, causing them to pulse with sickly green and purple light that hurt to look at directly. You feel the weight of this place pressing down, the accumulated malice of centuries soaked into stone that remembers every lesson taught through pain and humiliation. The masters of Mele Magthyr specialized in breaking the spirits of young males, reducing them to obedient weapons who would serve without question or hesitation. The curriculum extended far beyond simple combat training, though that formed the foundation upon which everything else was built. Students learned to navigate the treacherous social hierarchies that defined drow culture, to recognize opportunities for advancement through betrayal, to identify weakness in others, and exploit it without mercy. They studied the art of torture, not merely as a means of extracting information, but as entertainment, as sport, as a demonstration of power over those unfortunate enough to fall into their grasp. Drizzt entered this institution with his father's words echoing in his mind, a secret armor against the corruption that awaited him. The first weeks proved brutal, beyond anything he had imagined. The masters employed both physical and psychological techniques to break down the students, pitting them against each other in contests where losing meant agony and winning required inflicting that agony upon your classmates. Sleep deprivation, starvation, exposure to magical torments that left no physical scars, but carved deep wounds into the psyche itself. All these became routine parts of the training regimen. Yet Drizzt discovered that his father had prepared him better than either of them had realized. The countless hours of physical training in House Do'Urden's practice chambers had built his body into an instrument of devastating efficiency. His reflexes operated at speeds that left other students scrambling to keep pace. His understanding of leverage, balance, and spatial awareness allowed him to anticipate attacks before they developed, to position himself advantageously in every engagement. Within the first month, he had established himself as one of the most naturally gifted students in his class, a reputation that provided some insulation from the worst of the Academy's cruelties. But natural talent alone could not shield him from the moral challenges he faced. The masters assigned exercises designed to desensitize students to suffering, to transform empathy into a weakness to be purged. Students were given captured surface dwellers and instructed to practice interrogation techniques, to explore the limits of pain tolerance, to discover just how long a victim could be kept alive while enduring agony that should have killed them hours earlier. The other students embraced these lessons with enthusiasm, competing to devise ever more creative torments, laughing at the screams and pleas for mercy. Drizzt participated because refusal meant failure, and failure meant death, or worse, being transformed into one of the Driders, the horrible spider-drow hybrids that served as cautionary examples of what happened to those who disappointed Loth. He performed the required actions with mechanical precision, his face carefully arranged into expressions of appropriate cruelty, his voice delivering the expected taunts and threats. But inside, he died a little with each session, felt pieces of his soul withering like flowers denied sunlight. He looked into the eyes of his victims and saw not enemies or objects, but people, individuals with hopes and fears, and loved ones who would mourn their loss. The nightmares came every time he closed his eyes. He saw the faces of those he had hurt, heard their screams echoing through the corridors of his dreams, felt their blood on his hands, no matter how many times he washed them. Other students slept peacefully, untroubled by conscience or regret. Drizzt learned to meditate instead of sleeping, using techniques Zaknafine had taught him to quiet his mind and find moments of rest without descending into the horror show his subconscious had become. The years at Melee Magthyr ground forward with relentless momentum. Drizzt advanced through the ranks, earning recognition as one of the Academy's most promising students. His instructors praised his technical proficiency, while noting with some concern his tendency toward mercy in practice bouts. His reluctance to inflict unnecessary pain, even when such infliction earned bonus points. They attributed this softness to inexperience, assuming that time and proper conditioning would burn away such weakness. They could not imagine that it represented an immutable core of character, carefully cultivated and fiercely defended against all their efforts to corrupt it. During his time at the academy, Drizzt also attended Sorceer, the school of wizardry, though his talents lay more with blade than with spell. It was here that he encountered Massage Hunnet, a student from a rival house who possessed a remarkable magical item, an obsidian figurine that could summon a panther from the astral plane. The creature, named Gwennyfar, possessed intelligence and grace that captivated Drizzt from their first meeting. He sensed in the great cat a kindred spirit, a being trapped in service, but maintaining dignity and autonomy despite her circumstances. Massage served as apprentice to a mysterious figure known only as the Faceless One, a master of Sorceer whose features had been destroyed by acid, leaving only raw tissue where a face should have been. In truth, the Faceless One was Alton Dever, the last surviving member of the house that Do'Urden had destroyed on the night of Drizzt's birth. Alton had assumed this identity after the original Faceless One was murdered by Massage himself, who poured acid on Alton's face to complete the disguise. The young Dever seethed with desire for vengeance against House Do'Urden, particularly against Drizzt, whose birth had powered the magical assault that destroyed his family. These complex machinations unfolded around Drizzt as he completed his studies, though he remained largely unaware of the danger. His focus remained on survival, on maintaining the delicate balance between meeting the Academy's expectations and preserving the core of goodness his father had nurtured. He graduated from Melee Mag Thyr in the year 1327 Dale Reckoning, claiming top honors in his class and earning recognition as one of the finest warriors the Academy had produced in generations. Upon graduation, Drizzt returned to House Do'Urden to begin his service as a warrior of his family. But his homecoming proved brief, for shortly after his return, Dinin led a patrol to the surface world, a raid designed to capture slaves and demonstrate the house's continued strength. Drizzt was chosen to participate, his first journey beyond the Underdark, and his first real test of whether he could maintain his principles when faced with the brutal realities of drow raiding. The patrol traveled through miles of winding tunnels, ascending toward the surface world that Zaknafine had described in whispered conversations. When they finally emerged into open air, Drizzt experienced sensations he had never imagined possible. The vastness of the sky overhead, the feeling of wind against his skin, the sense of growing things and clean water. All of it overwhelmed his Underdark-adapted senses. But he had little time to process these new experiences, Verdinin quickly located their target, a small community of surface elves living in peace and completely unprepared for the horror about to descend upon them. The drow attacked with characteristic brutality, slaughtering the adult elves with efficient violence while capturing the young for slavery. Drizzt watched his companions reveling in the carnage, saw them torturing victims for entertainment rather than simply killing them quickly, and felt his gorge rising with revulsion. Everything Zaknafine had taught him screamed at him to intervene, to defend these innocent people rather than participate in their destruction. Yet he also recognized that open defiance would accomplish nothing except his own death and the deaths of the elves regardless. So he made a choice that would alter the course of his entire life. During the chaos of battle, Drizzt found a young elf child hiding beneath a table, her eyes wide with terror as she watched her family being slaughtered around her. The girl could not have been more than 10 years old, her face streaked with tears, her small body trembling with fear. Every other drow in that raiding party would have killed her without hesitation, or captured her for a lifetime of slavery and torment. Drizzt took his blade and killed the child's mother, who already lay mortally wounded nearby. Then he smeared the child with her mother's blood, laying her across the corpse and arranging them to appear as if the girl had also died. He whispered urgently to her, telling her to remain absolutely still, to play dead no matter what happened around her. The child, Elephane Tusarail by name though Drizzt, would not learn this for many years, understood and obeyed, freezing in position while the drow continued their rampage around her. When the raid concluded and the patrol returned to Menzoberranzan with their prizes and prisoners, Drizzt's companions spoke of his apparent kills, congratulating him on his efficiency and commenting on his technique. They believed he had slaughtered mother and child alike, demonstrating proper drow ruthlessness. The deception appeared complete, and Drizzt allowed himself to hope that perhaps he could maintain his double life, playing the role expected of him while secretly subverting drow cruelty whenever possible. But word reached Zaknafine of his son's actions on the surface raid, and the weapons master heard only that Drizzt had killed an elf child. The news struck him with devastating force, shattering the hope he had nurtured for years. He had believed that his teachings might have taken root deeply enough to withstand the Academy's corruption, that his son might remain true to principles of mercy and protection, even when surrounded by cruelty. Learning that Drizzt had apparently murdered a child seemed to prove that all his efforts had been for nothing, that the darkness of drow nature had claimed his son as completely as it had claimed every other child born in Menzoberranzan. Zaknafine's rage burned with an intensity that frightened those who witnessed it. The legendary weapons master, always controlled and precise in his movements, began destroying practice equipment and lashing out at anyone who came near. When he finally regained enough composure to think clearly, he challenged his son to a sparring match, ostensibly to test the skills Drizzt had developed at the academy. But both of them understood the true nature of what would occur, that this would be a fight to the death between father and son. They met in the tunnels east of Menzoberranzan, away from the city's prying eyes, in a place where their battle would not be interrupted. Zaknafine attacked with a ferocity that Drizzt had never experienced even in their most intense training sessions. His blades seeking vital points with murderous intent. The young drow defended desperately, unable to understand why his father had turned on him with such hatred, why the one person in all of Menzoberranzan who had shown him genuine love now sought his death. Then, as they fought, Drizzt finally managed to make himself understood through the clash of steel and the fury of combat. He insisted that he had not killed the child, that he had saved her by hiding her beneath her mother's corpse, that he had maintained the principles Zaknafine had taught him despite the enormous pressure to conform. The words penetrated the weapon's master's rage, causing him to pause and truly look at his son, to see the truth written in those unusual lavender eyes. Zaknafine's demeanor transformed instantly from rage to relief, so profound it nearly broke him. He had not lost his son to the darkness after all. The teachings had taken root, had survived the academy, and the first real test of whether Drizzt could maintain his principles when they conflicted with drow expectations. In that moment, overcome with emotion, Zaknafine revealed a secret he had kept for decades. He was not merely Drizzt's trainer and mentor, but his actual father, his biological parent rather than risen. The male Drizzt had been told had sired him. The revelation bound them even closer together. Father and son, no longer hidden behind the formal relationships of drow society, but openly acknowledging the love they felt for each other. They spoke at length about what Drizzt had experienced, about the challenges of maintaining goodness in a society built on evil, about the future, and whether any path existed that might allow them both to escape Menzoberranzan's corruption. For a brief moment, standing in those tunnels east of the city, they allowed themselves to imagine possibilities that seemed impossible. Futures where they might live according to their principles, rather than in defiance of them. But their reconciliation came too late, for events had already been set in motion that neither could stop. Matron Malice had learned of the surface raid and Drizzt's actions there, though her sources told her only that her son had displayed appropriate ruthlessness. However, Loth had also taken notice, and the Spider Queen found the Do'Urden house displeasing. The exact reasons remained mysterious, as the goddess rarely explained her decisions to mortals, but the message came through clearly enough. House Do'Urden had fallen out of favor, and only significant sacrifice could restore their standing. Malice recognized what must be done. Zaknafine, the legendary weapons master, the finest blade in Menzoberranzan, represented the most valuable asset House Do'Urden possessed. His sacrifice would demonstrate absolute devotion to Loth, would prove that the matron placed her goddess above all other considerations, even her own desires and her house's military strength. The fact that Zaknafine had sired her most promising son, that his loss would devastate both the house's fighting capabilities and her own personal interests, only made the sacrifice more powerful. The weapons master was taken during the night, overwhelmed by numbers and magical bindings that prevented him from fighting back or taking his own life. They brought him to a hidden chapel where the most sacred and terrible rituals were conducted, where priestesses of Loth worked their darkest magic. Drizzt knew nothing of what was happening until it was over, until messengers informed him that Zaknafine Do'Urden had been sacrificed to appease the Spider Queen, that his father was dead, and that Drizzt himself now bore the responsibility of serving as House Do'Urden's primary weapons master. The news struck Drizzt with force that went beyond mere grief. His father, the one person in all of Menzoberranzan who had loved him and understood him, had been murdered by his own house to satisfy a goddess he despised. Everything Zaknafine had worked for, all the principles he had tried to instill, all the hope he had nurtured that perhaps one drow might escape the darkness, all of it seemed to have been for nothing. The weight of this loss crushed down upon Drizzt with suffocating intensity, and for long days he contemplated simply allowing himself to be killed in some training accident or duel, ending his participation in a society that had taken everything that mattered to him. But then, in his darkest moments, he heard his father's voice echoing through memory, reminding him that giving up meant letting the darkness win, that the only way to honor Zaknafine's sacrifice was to continue living according to the principles he had taught. Drizzt began to understand that remaining in Menzoberranzan, serving House Do'Urden, and participating in their cruelty would be the ultimate betrayal of everything his father had died believing in. If Zaknafine's sacrifice was to have any meaning at all, if the pain and loss were to serve any purpose, then Drizzt had to escape, had to prove that a drow could choose light over darkness, even when that choice meant losing everything. But before he could plan his escape, other events continued to unfold. Alton Devur and Massage Hunnet finally made their move, attempting to kill Drizzt outside the city to exact vengeance for House Devur's destruction. The ambush went poorly, with Drizzt's combat skills proving superior even to their combined efforts and magical advantages. During the confrontation, Alton was killed when a magical wand he wielded was destroyed and ignited, blowing him to pieces and ending the last of the Dever line. Massage, recognizing that his life hung in the balance, attempted to negotiate with Drizzt. In exchange for being allowed to live, he offered the obsidian figurine that summoned Gwennyfar. Knowing that Drizzt had formed a bond with the Astral Panther during their previous encounters, Drizzt accepted the trade, though he made it clear that he valued the figurine not as property, but as a means of calling a companion who chose to answer his summons. The distinction mattered deeply to him, reflecting his rejection of the drow tendency to view all other beings as tools or slaves. With Gwennyfar at his side, and nothing left to tie him to Menzoberranzan, except chains of obligation he had long since rejected, Drizzt Do'Urden made his decision. In the year 1328 Dale Reckoning, he departed from the city of his birth, walking away from House Do'Urden and everything he had ever known. He ventured into the Underdark's wilderness as a rogue and exile, hunted by his own people, without destination or plan beyond simple survival. The choice meant abandoning any chance of comfort or security, meant facing dangers that would have seemed unthinkable with a house's resources behind him. But it also meant freedom, genuine freedom for the first time in his life. The ability to make choices based on his principles rather than his circumstances. As he walked through the tunnels that led away from Menzoberranzan, Gwennyfar padding silently at his side, Drizzt felt grief and fear warring with something he had rarely experienced in the city of his birth. He felt hope, fragile and uncertain, but undeniably present, that perhaps the path ahead might lead somewhere worth reaching, that perhaps his father's faith in him had not been misplaced after all. Section 3, Exile and Survival. The tunnels of the Underdark stretched endlessly before the exile, winding through stone as old as the world itself. Passages that had never known light or the touch of surface winds. Drizzt Do'Urden walked away from Menzoberranzan with nothing but his weapons, his father's final teachings burning in his heart, and the obsidian figurine that would summon his only companion in the darkness ahead. You feel the weight of that departure, the finality of choosing exile over compromise, the terror and exhilaration of stepping into absolute unknown with no plan beyond simple survival. The first weeks passed in a blur of desperate motion and constant vigilance. Drizzt moved through territories he had patrolled as a warrior of House Do'Urden. But everything felt different now, without the backing of family and city. Creatures that would have fled from a drow patrol now evaluated him with predatory interest, recognizing a lone traveler separated from the protection that numbers provided. He fought hook horrors in narrow passages, where their clicking mandibles echoed off stone walls. He evaded ropers that disguised themselves as rock formations, until their tentacles lashed out with devastating speed. He navigated around carrion crawler territories, those segmented horrors that could paralyze prey with their poisonous tentacles before consuming them alive. Gwynethar proved invaluable during these early days of exile. The astral panther possessed senses beyond those of any natural creature, detecting dangers that even Drizzt's keen awareness might miss. She could smell the approach of predators through miles of winding passages, hear the subtle vibrations that indicated unstable stone or hidden pitfalls, sense magical traps and wards that protected territories claimed by Underdark powers. But perhaps more importantly than her practical utility, she provided companionship that kept the exile tethered to some semblance of sanity during long stretches of solitary travel. Yet even Gwynethar could not remain with him constantly. The magic of the figurine allowed her to manifest on the material plane for only limited periods before she needed to return to her home on the astral plane to rest and recover her strength. Drizzt learned through experimentation that roughly 1 day of manifestation required 2 days of rest, meaning that for the majority of his time, he wandered the Underdark completely alone. The isolation pressed down upon him with weight that felt almost physical, a crushing loneliness that made him question whether survival without society held any meaning at all. He talked to himself in the darkness, conducting conversations with imaginary companions, arguing with memories of his father about philosophy and tactics. He spoke to Gwynethar during the precious hours she could manifest, explaining his thoughts and fears, describing memories of Zaknafine and the lessons that had shaped his character. The great cat listened with attention that suggested understanding beyond mere animal awareness, responding with rumbling purrs when he needed comfort, with playful swats when his mood grew too dark, with alert tension when real dangers approached. Days became weeks, weeks became months, and the months stretched into years as Drizzt wandered deeper into regions where even Menzoberranzan's extensive maps showed only speculation and rumor. He discovered a rhythm to survival in the Underdark's wilderness, learning to read the subtle signs that indicated safe territories versus hunting grounds of apex predators. He mapped the locations of water sources, memorized the patterns of various creatures' movements, identified which fungi were edible and which would kill him with a single bite. But the psychological toll of this existence began manifesting in ways that frightened him deeply. Drizzt found himself experiencing moments where he could not remember the past several hours, discovering himself in locations with no memory of traveling to them. During these gaps in awareness, something else took control. A savage survival persona stripped of complexity and moral consideration. He would come back to consciousness, standing over the corpses of creatures He did not remember fighting, his weapons dripping with blood, his body moving with efficiency that operated beneath the level of rational thought. This alternate personality, which he came to think of as the hunter, emerged from the need to survive in an environment that demanded absolute ruthlessness. The philosophical principles Zaknafine had taught him required society to function, needed other people to protect and defend. Alone in the Underdark's predatory wilderness, those principles became luxuries he could not afford. Survival demanded simpler priorities: kill or be killed, eat or starve, hide or be hunted. The hunter thought only of the present moment, of immediate threats and opportunities, operating with animal efficiency that kept Drizzt alive, even as it threatened to consume everything that made him different from the drow he had fled. The internal struggle continued as years accumulated, as the fugitive drow wandered through territories claimed by mind flayers, those horror creatures from nightmare that fed upon the thoughts and memories of sentient beings. He skirted the edges of aboleth pools, ancient and malevolent intelligences that had existed since before the first elves walked the surface world. He discovered ruins of civilizations that had risen and fallen in the Underdark's depths, their names forgotten and their purposes lost to time beyond memory. A full decade passed in this manner. 10 years of isolation, broken only by Gwenny Farr's periodic manifestations, and the increasingly frequent emergence of the hunter persona. Drizzt felt himself eroding, the social aspects of his personality withering from lack of use, his capacity for complex thought diminishing as survival instinct became the only mental process that seemed to matter. He wondered if this was how he would end, not killed by monsters or captured by drow hunters, but simply consumed from within by the savage creature he had become to survive. Then hunters from Menzoberranzan found his trail. The patrol consisted of his brother Dinan and his sister Breeza, accompanied by soldiers whose skills had been honed through years of Underdark warfare. They tracked him with patient determination, following signs that Drizzt had not realized he was leaving, closing the distance with professional efficiency. What Drizzt did not know was that they possessed a means of locating him magically, a house emblem he still carried in his pouch that served as a beacon to priestesses of Loth who sought him. When Drizzt finally realized the source of their tracking ability, he used it against them, fitting the pouch over Gwenny Farr's head and sending her to mislead his hunters while he escaped in a different direction. The ploy worked, buying him time to flee deeper into unknown territories where even his pursuers hesitated to follow. But the encounter reminded him that Menzoberranzan had not forgotten his existence, that his family continued seeking him despite the years that had passed since his departure. The flight from his pursuers brought Drizzt into a region he had visited once before. Years earlier, when he still served House Do'Urden, a raiding party led by Dinin had attacked a mining operation of Svirfneblin, the deep gnomes who delved the earth for precious gems. During that raid, Drizzt had shown mercy to the mining party's leader, a burrow warden named Belwar Desengulp, convincing his companions to leave the gnome alive as a warning to others about venturing too close to drow territory. Dinin, however, had severed both of Belwar's hands with cruel efficiency, leaving the Svirfneblin maimed as punishment for trespassing. Now desperate and exhausted from years of isolation, Drizzt found himself approaching Blingdenstone, the Svirfneblin city carved into gray stone deep in the Underdark. He knew the risk he took, for deep gnomes had every reason to hate the drow, who raided their communities for slaves and sport. But he also recognized that he could not continue surviving alone in the wilderness, that the hunter persona was consuming him, that he needed contact with society before he lost himself completely to the savage creature he was becoming. The Svirfneblin guards spotted him approaching and raised alarms, their crossbows trained on the drow, who had emerged from the darkness with hands raised in gestures of peace. They surrounded him with weapons ready, their small faces set in expressions of grim determination. Drizzt made no move to defend himself or flee, accepting whatever judgment these people would render. Death seemed preferable to continuing his isolated existence, watching himself transform into a monster one day at a time. They brought him into the city for interrogation, placing him in a dark room where Svirfneblin officials could question him about his presence and intentions. Drizzt explained his exile from Menzoberranzan, described his rejection of drow cruelty, spoke of his desperate need for any connection with beings who valued creation over destruction. His interrogators listened with skepticism, for drow were known for deception and betrayal, their words as dangerous as their blades. Then Drizzt recalled the mining party from years before and requested to speak with Belwar Desengulp, hoping that the burrow warden might remember the mercy shown during that raid. The request caused surprise among his interrogators, for they had not expected a drow to know specific names of Svirfneblin citizens. They brought Belwar to the interrogation chamber, and the gnome stood before his former enemy with hands replaced by magical implements, a hammer and pickaxe that served as both tools and weapons. Belwar studied the drow who had saved his life years earlier, evaluating whether the exile was genuine or simply another drow trick designed for some incomprehensible purpose. He saw exhaustion in those unusual lavender eyes, recognized the haunted look of one who had endured horrors that left scars deeper than any physical wound. After long moments of consideration, Belwar spoke on Drizzt's behalf, explaining to the city's leaders that this particular drow had demonstrated mercy when cruelty would have been easier, had risked his own, standing to spare Svirfneblin lives. The city's king, Schnicktic, granted Drizzt permission to remain in Blingdenstone temporarily, though many citizens remained deeply uncomfortable with a drow living among them. Drizzt found himself experiencing genuine community for the first time since leaving Menzoberranzan, surrounded by people who valued cooperation over intimidation, who found joy in honest labor and simple pleasures. He worked in the mines alongside Svirfneblin crews, using his speed and strength to assist with excavation, while Belwar supervised and gradually became something approaching a friend. The deep gnome understood loss and betrayal, knew what it meant to have your life destroyed by forces beyond your control. He recognized in Drizzt a kindred spirit, someone who had been broken by circumstance, but refused to remain broken, who fought to define himself through choices, rather than accepting definitions imposed by others. They spent hours together in the mines and during rest periods, with Belwar sharing wisdom about moving forward rather than remaining frozen in moments of loss, about honoring those we have loved by becoming the people they believed we could be. For nearly a year, Drizzt lived among the Svirfneblin, gradually rediscovering pieces of himself that had been buried beneath layers of survival instinct and defensive numbness. He played games with gnome children, who gradually lost their fear of his dark skin and drow heritage. He attended festivals and celebrations, experiencing the kind of communal joy that had no place in drow society. He began to remember what it felt like to be something other than afraid or angry, to exist without constant vigilance against betrayal or violence. But this period of relative peace ended when a new threat emerged from Menzoberranzan. Matron Malice, frustrated by repeated failures to capture or kill her errant son, had performed a ritual of terrible power called Zinkarla, the Spirit Wraith. She raised Zaknafine from death, forcing his spirit back into his body and binding it to her will through dark magic and Loth's favor. The undead weapons master retained all his legendary combat skills, but operated under Malice's mental commands, compelled to hunt and destroy the son he had loved more than his own life. The Spirit Wraith tracked Drizzt with relentless determination, following trails that would have been invisible to ordinary hunters, drawn by magical compulsion toward his target regardless of distance or obstacles. When word reached Blingdenstone that something monstrous was hunting through the Underdark, something that killed everything it encountered while moving unerringly in a specific direction, King Schnicktic recognized that Drizzt's presence had brought danger to the Svirfneblin city. With regret, but also pragmatic necessity, the king informed Drizzt that he could no longer remain in Blingdenstone, the threat pursuing him endangered the entire community. Drizzt accepted this judgment without protest, understanding that his exile status made him a permanent danger to anyone who offered him shelter. But when he prepared to depart, Belwar announced his intention to accompany the drow, explaining that friendship meant standing beside someone even when circumstances made that choice dangerous or inconvenient. Together, the drow and the Sverfneblin ventured back into the Underdark's wilderness, seeking to draw the pursuing threat away from Blingdenstone, while also confronting whatever horror Menzoberranzan had sent to destroy them. Their journey brought them into territories controlled by mind flayers, those tentacle-faced aberrations whose psionic powers could enslave minds and strip away free will with horrifying efficiency. The Illithids captured both travelers, using their mental abilities to transform them into mindless thralls who would serve the colony's needs. This could have been the end of Drizzt's story, his consciousness destroyed, and his body reduced to a tool for creatures even more monstrous than the drow. But the hunter persona, that savage survival instinct that operated beneath the level of rational thought, proved resistant to the mind flayer's control. The Illithids could dominate Drizzt's conscious mind, but the hunter existed in deeper places, primal regions of the psyche that did not respond to external control. When opportunity presented itself, the hunter erupted with savage violence, destroying the mind flayer that held them captive and freeing both Drizzt and Belwar from thraldom. They fled from the Illithid colony, knowing that the creatures would pursue them with patient malice, seeking to recapture the slaves that had escaped. Their flight brought them to a place called the Acid Eyrie, a vast cavern where pools of corrosive liquid bubbled and steamed, filling the air with vapors that burned the lungs and corroded any organic matter they touched. And there, in that hellish landscape, Drizzt finally confronted the horror that had been hunting him across the Underdark. Zaknafine approached through the toxic mists, moving with the deadly grace that had made him legendary, his eyes empty of recognition or mercy. Drizzt recognized his father despite the changes that undeath had wrought, recognized the fighting style, and the particular way Zaknafine held his weapons. The realization struck him with force beyond any physical blow. His father, the one person who had loved him unconditionally, had been transformed into an undead abomination, compelled to kill him. They fought among the acid pools, blades singing in patterns of such complexity that watching them became an exercise in barely contained chaos. Zaknafine attacked with the full measure of his legendary skill. But Drizzt had learned from the greatest weapons master in Menzoberranzan, had absorbed lessons that now allowed him to match his father blow for blow. The battle raged across the treacherous terrain, both combatants moving with inhuman speed and precision, while toxic vapors swirled around them. But then something shifted in the spirit wraith's movements. Malice, seeking to take advantage of Zaknafine's full combat capabilities, had given his undead form too much of his original mind and personality. In the heat of battle, facing the son he had trained and loved, Zaknafine began to fight against the magical compulsion that bound him. For brief moments, consciousness flickered in those dead eyes, recognition and horror, and desperate love warring against Malice's commands. Drizzt recognized these moments, understood that his father's spirit still existed somewhere within the undead shell, still fought to protect rather than destroy, despite the magic that compelled otherwise. He called to Zaknafine, reminding him of lessons taught in House Do'Urden's practice chambers, speaking of honor and principle, and the belief that goodness could survive even in the darkest places. The words reached something deep within the spirit wraith, providing ammunition for Zaknafine's struggle against his binding. In one final moment of clarity, Zaknafine regained control of his body. Rather than continue fighting, rather than risk losing control again, and being forced to kill the son he had given everything to save, the weapon's master hurled himself into one of the acid pools. The corrosive liquid dissolved flesh and bone, destroying the undead body and breaking Malice's magical hold permanently. Zaknafine Do'Urden died for the second time, this final death chosen freely to protect the child, who represented his only hope for redemption. Drizzt stood at the edge of that acid pool, watching the last traces of his father disappear into bubbling liquid, and felt something fundamental shift within his soul. The grief was immense, overwhelming, threatening to drag him down into despair from which there could be no recovery. But alongside the grief came understanding, recognition of what Zaknafine's final sacrifice represented. His father had given everything twice over to provide him with the chance to escape Menzoberranzan's corruption and live according to principles that had no place in drow society. The only way to honor that sacrifice was to continue the journey, to refuse surrender to darkness or despair, to prove that Zaknafine's faith had not been misplaced. Drizzt turned away from the acid pools with Belwar at his side, ready to face whatever challenges lay ahead, carrying his father's memory like a torch against the endless night of the Underdark. The path forward remained uncertain, but at least now he understood his purpose with clarity that left no room for doubt. He would escape to the surface world that Zaknafine had described, would find freedom in the realm of light and open spaces, would live a life that justified the terrible price his father had paid. The journey would continue, and with it, the transformation from exile to legend. Section 4, The Long Ascent. The journey from Blingdenstone back into the Underdark's wilderness resumed with Belwar at Drizzt's side. Though the Sverfneblin could not travel far from his home city for extended periods, the deep gnome eventually had to return to his people, leaving Drizzt once more alone, except for Gwenny Farr's periodic manifestations. The exile continued his wandering through the upper regions of the Underdark, driven now by clearer purpose than mere survival. Zaknafine's final sacrifice had crystallized his understanding. The only way to honor his father's memory was to reach the surface world, to find freedom in the realm of light that the weapon's master had described in whispered conversations decades earlier. The passages that wound upward through the Underdark's levels grew progressively different as Drizzt climbed toward the surface world, where the deep regions featured massive caverns carved by ancient geological forces and tunnels wide enough for armies to march through. The upper levels constricted into narrow corridors that twisted through stone like the burrows of enormous worms. The air itself changed, carrying subtle hints of moisture and temperature variation that spoke of proximity to the realm above. You feel the walls pressing closer, the weight of miles of stone bearing down from above, while the promise of open sky pulls from somewhere beyond reach. Gwennifer proved invaluable during this phase of the journey. The astral panther possessed senses beyond those of any natural creature, detecting dangers that even Drizzt's keen awareness might miss. She could smell the approach of predators through miles of winding passages, hear the subtle vibrations that indicated unstable stone or hidden pitfalls, sense magical traps and wards that protected territories claimed by Underdark powers. More than her practical utility, though, she provided companionship that kept the exiled drow tethered to sanity during long stretches of solitary travel. The climb took months of careful navigation through territories claimed by creatures that viewed any intruder as potential prey or competition. Drizzt encountered Kuo-toa in their mad underwater cities, avoided mind flayer colonies that pulsed with psionic energy that made his head ache from miles away, skirted the edges of Duergar settlements, where gray dwarves labored with grim efficiency at forges that burned with unnatural flames. Each encounter required careful evaluation of risk versus reward, decisions about whether to fight, flee, or attempt to pass through undetected. Then, after what felt like an eternity of climbing through progressively narrower passages, Drizzt emerged into sunlight for the first time in his life. The experience struck him with overwhelming force that went beyond mere physical sensation. The sky stretched overhead in impossible vastness, blue and distant, and utterly alien to one who had spent his entire existence beneath stone ceilings. Wind touched his face, carrying scents of pine and growing things and possibilities he had no names for. The openness of it all, the sheer infinity of space above and around him, caused a moment of vertigo so intense he fell to his knees on cold stone. But the wonder of emergence proved short-lived, replaced quickly by harsh realities of surface existence. The sunlight, even diffused through cloud cover, seared his eyes with pain that felt like molten metal being poured directly into his skull. His dark vision, so valuable in the Underdark, became a liability as light intensity overwhelmed sensory systems adapted for absolute darkness. He wrapped cloth around his face, creating makeshift protection. But even ambient light filtering through the fabric caused discomfort that made focusing difficult. The cold struck him with equal force. He had emerged in a mountainous region near the Rovan Mountains, where temperatures plunged well below freezing, and wind cut through his spider silk clothing as if it were not there. He stumbled across rocky terrain, his balance disrupted by the lack of walls and ceiling to provide spatial reference points, searching desperately for shelter that might protect him from elements that threatened to kill him as surely as any Underdark predator. A cave entrance provided temporary salvation, and Drizzt crawled inside with Gwennyfar manifested at his side. He built a crude fire using techniques observed during his years wandering the Underdark, though the smoke made his eyes water, and the heat felt strange after a lifetime without natural flame. Gradually, the immediate crisis passed, and he survived his first day on the surface through sheer stubborn refusal to die after coming so far. The days that followed established a pattern of gradual adaptation. Drizzt emerged from his cave only during twilight hours or on overcast days, when the sun's light caused manageable pain rather than blinding agony. He hunted for food, discovering that surface creatures moved and behaved differently from their Underdark counterparts. Deer and elk roamed the mountain slopes, their alert wariness presenting challenges, unlike the blind aggression of most subterranean predators. He learned to track through snow, to read signs written in disturbed terrain and broken branches, to predict where prey would go rather than simply reacting to immediate threats. But survival alone could not provide purpose or connection. Drizzt wandered the surface wilderness, avoiding the few human settlements he encountered, uncertain how surface races would react to a drow appearing in their midst. His caution proved well-founded when he stumbled into a situation that would define his early surface existence in ways both terrible and transformative. A family of farmers named Thistledown lived in a remote homestead, working honest land and bothering no one. They encountered Drizzt purely by chance when he passed near their property, and their initial reaction mixed fear with curiosity. Before any meaningful communication could occur, disaster struck from an unexpected direction. Two Barghists, creatures of the lower plains that could assume humanoid forms, had been terrorizing the region. these monsters discovered the Thistledown family, and recognizing an opportunity to frame the drow for crimes that would turn all surface dwellers against him, assumed Drizzt's appearance and slaughtered the entire family with brutal efficiency. When Drizzt discovered the massacre, the horror of it struck him with force that transcended mere sympathy. These people had died because of him, killed by creatures wearing his face, their blood spilled to serve a purpose he could not yet understand. The guilt threatened to crush him, adding to the already enormous weight he carried from years of compromise and failure. But alongside the guilt came rage, cold and focused, directed at the creatures who had committed this atrocity while wearing his identity. He tracked the Barghists with relentless determination, following their trail through wilderness where few humans ventured. When he finally confronted them, Gwennyfar at his side, the battle was swift and brutal. The creatures in their true forms proved formidable opponents, but they faced a drow warrior trained by the greatest weapons master in Menzoberranzan. Hardened by years of surviving alone in the Underdark's predatory darkness, Drizzt scimitars sang their deadly song, and the Barghists fell. Their threat ended permanently. But the damage to Drizzt's reputation had already been done. A bounty hunter named Roddy McGristle, a cruel and prejudiced man who despised all non-humans, decided that the drow had committed the Thistledown murders. McGristle gathered allies and began hunting Drizzt across the wilderness, determined to claim whatever reward he imagined would come from killing or capturing a dark elf. The pursuit added another layer of danger to Drizzt's already precarious existence, forcing him to remain constantly vigilant against threats that came not just from monsters, but from supposedly civilized people who judged him guilty without trial or evidence. During this period of flight and survival, as winter descended upon the mountains with brutal intensity, Drizzt sought shelter in a cave that turned out to be occupied by a massive bear. Under normal circumstances, such an encounter would have ended in violence, with one or both creatures dying in the confined space. Instead, something remarkable occurred. The bear, called Bluster by those who knew of him, sensed in this dark elf something different from typical threats. Perhaps it was Drizzt's lack of aggressive intent, or perhaps some deeper recognition of shared isolation. Whatever the reason, the bear allowed Drizzt to share his winter den, and the unlikely companions provided each other warmth through the coldest months. When spring arrived and Bluster emerged from hibernation, the bear led Drizzt to a grove deep in the forest, a place that pulsed with natural magic and harmony. There, in a fortified home built into the trees themselves, lived a remarkable individual who would change Drizzt's understanding of surface existence in fundamental ways. Montolio de Bruchet, known affectionately as Mushi to his friends, was a blind ranger who had retreated to this grove after a long career serving the causes of good throughout the realms. Despite his lack of sight, or perhaps because he had developed other senses to compensate, Montolio perceived more about the world than most people with perfect vision. He recognized immediately that Drizzt was different from typical drow, sensed the conflict and principles that drove the exile's actions, understood the potential for greatness that lay dormant beneath layers of guilt and uncertainty. Montolio invited Drizzt to stay in the grove, offering to teach him the ways of the surface world in exchange for companionship and assistance, defending the sacred space from those who would exploit or destroy it. The blind ranger spoke of principles that aligned perfectly with everything Zaknafine had tried to teach, described a philosophy of life that honored nature and protected the innocent without seeking dominion or control. He introduced Drizzt to the concept of the ranger, a warrior who used martial prowess not for conquest or glory, but for preservation and balance. More importantly, Montolio spoke of Myliki, the goddess of forests and rangers, a deity who judged beings by their actions and intentions rather than their heritage or appearance. For the first time since leaving Menzoberranzan, Drizzt encountered the concept of a divinity who might actually approve of the path he had chosen, who valued mercy and protection over domination and cruelty. The revelation transformed his understanding of spirituality, replacing Loth's malevolent influence with something gentle and affirming. The months Drizzt spent in Montolio's grove represented perhaps the most peaceful period he had experienced since early childhood. The blind ranger taught him to read the surface world's subtle signs, to understand weather patterns and seasonal changes, to recognize which plants healed and which poisoned, to move through forest terrain with the same confidence he had developed in Underdark tunnels. They sparred together regularly, with Montolio demonstrating that blindness posed no disadvantage when you learned to read opponents through sound and air movement, rather than relying solely on vision. But the peace could not last, for the grove's very sanctity made it a target for those who served darker purposes. A massive orc horde, driven by a powerful shaman, and seeking to claim the grove's magical energies for their own purposes, descended upon Montolio's home with overwhelming numbers. Drizzt and the blind ranger fought side by side, their blades singing in harmony, while woodland creatures answered Montolio's call and joined the defense. Gwennyfar materialized to tear through orc ranks with savage efficiency. Even Bluster, the bear, emerged from the forest to defend his friend's home. The battle raged for hours, with defenders holding against impossible odds through skill and determination. When elven allies arrived to assist, drawn by magical alarms Montolio had triggered, the tide finally turned. the orcs broke and fled, leaving their dead scattered across ground that had been sacred and would be consecrated anew through the blood spilled in its defense. But victory came with terrible cost. Montolio, already weakened by age and the rigors of battle, succumbed to injuries sustained during the fight. He died peacefully in his grove, surrounded by the creatures he had protected and the student who had become like a son to him. With his final breaths, the blind ranger made Drizzt promise not to remain isolated in the grove, but to venture out into the world and find his place among people who would value him for his character, rather than judge him for his heritage. The loss devastated Drizzt, adding another name to the list of those who had died while showing him kindness or love. Zaknafine, Belwar temporarily left behind, and now Montolio. All had paid prices for their association with a drow exile who brought danger wherever he traveled. The guilt threatened to overwhelm him, to convince him that isolation was the only ethical choice, that anyone who came close to him was doomed to suffer for that proximity. But Montolio's final words, delivered with the certainty of one who had lived long and learned well, cut through the guilt with simple truth. Running from connection was not honor, but cowardice. Hiding from the world was not protection, but surrender. Drizzt honored his mentor's memory by following the last instruction given, by leaving the grove and venturing once more into a world that would judge him harshly, but might, eventually, recognize the quality of his character beneath the darkness of his skin. Roddy McGristle continued his obsessive pursuit, driven by irrational hatred and determination to see the drow dead regardless of evidence or reason. Their confrontations grew increasingly brutal, with the bounty hunter showing himself willing to harm anyone who offered Drizzt aid or spoke in his defense. The vendetta finally ended when McGristle's cruelty exceeded even his allies' tolerance, when his actions revealed him as the true monster, while Drizzt consistently demonstrated heroism and principle. For years after leaving Montolio's grove, Drizzt wandered the surface world, moving from region to region, never staying long enough to establish real connections, but occasionally performing acts of heroism that slowly built a reputation. He saved travelers from bandits, defended isolated communities from monster attacks, rescued lost children from wilderness dangers. Slowly, painfully, individuals began to recognize that this particular drow defied every stereotype about his people, that his actions spoke louder than his heritage. The journey eventually brought him to Icewind Dale, that harsh and unforgiving region where 10 towns clustered around 3 lakes, their inhabitants eking out existence through fishing and mining in one of the most inhospitable environments the surface world offered. Here, in this place, where survival demanded cooperation, and where actions mattered more than appearances, Drizzt Do'Urden would finally find something that had eluded him throughout his entire existence. He would find home. Section 5. Emergence and Transformation. The path to Icewind Dale wound through territories that tested Drizzt in ways, both physical and emotional. 6 years passed between his emergence from the Underdark and his arrival in the frozen north. Years filled with wandering and occasional acts of heroism that slowly built a reputation among those willing to see past his heritage. He traveled with a group called the Weeping Friars for a time, finding temporary companionship among those dedicated to helping the suffering. But always, the restlessness drove him onward, searching for a place where he might finally belong, rather than simply being tolerated. When Drizzt finally reached Icewind Dale, he discovered a harsh and unforgiving region where 10 towns clustered around 3 frozen lakes, their inhabitants eking out existence through fishing, mining, and sheer, stubborn determination. The land seemed inhospitable to life itself, with howling winds and temperatures that could kill an unprepared traveler in hours. Yet people thrived here, building communities in defiance of the elements, cooperating because survival demanded it. You feel the bitter cold of that first arrival, the way wind cuts through clothing designed for gentler climates, the overwhelming sense of standing at the edge of civilization with nowhere left to run. Speaker Cassius of Bryn Shander, the largest of the 10 towns, met with Drizzt when the drow sought permission to settle in the region. The speaker's reaction mixed pragmatic concern with surprising wisdom. He denied Drizzt entry into Bryn Shander itself, recognizing that the citizens would never accept a dark elf living among them, regardless of his intentions or actions. But rather than simply driving him away, Cassius directed Drizzt to Kelvin's Cairn, the lone mountain that rose from the otherwise flat tundra landscape. There, the speaker suggested, Drizzt might build a reputation by protecting the towns from the creatures and threats that emerged from the wilderness, demonstrating his character through deeds that would speak louder than heritage. Drizzt established a sparse home in a cave on Kelvin's Cairn's barren northern slope, far from the towns, but close enough to respond when danger threatened. He patrolled the tundra and mountain passes, his ranger skills allowing him to track threats and intercept them before they reached populated areas. He fought yetis that wandered down from the heights seeking prey. He drove off barbarian raiders who tested the town's defenses. He protected fishermen from the remorhazes that occasionally broke through the ice, those enormous insected creatures whose internal heat allowed them to tunnel through frozen ground. The isolation continued, though now Drizzt could at least see signs of civilization from his mountain perch, could observe the lights of 10 towns twinkling across the tundra, on clear nights. He was close to society without being part of it, protecting people who would never thank him, defending communities that feared his very existence. The loneliness pressed down with familiar weight, but he endured, driven by principles Zaknafine had taught and Montolio had reinforced. This was what rangers did. They stood between civilization and wilderness, asked for nothing in return, found purpose in service rather than recognition. Then came an encounter that would change everything. Brunor Battlehammer, a gruff, red-bearded dwarf who had established himself as a master smith in the region, had adopted a human daughter years earlier after her family was killed by bandits. The girl, Catti-brie, possessed curiosity and courage that sometimes exceeded her wisdom. She ventured onto Kelvin's cairns slopes one day, exploring territories her father had warned her away from, seeking adventure as young people often do despite knowing better. Drizzt spotted her from a distance, recognized immediately that she wandered into territory claimed by a particularly aggressive yeti. He tracked the girl from concealment, moving silently through snow and stone, positioning himself between her and dangers she remained blissfully unaware of. When the yeti finally attacked, Drizzt intervened with explosive violence, his scimitars ending the threat before Catti-brie even realized she had been in danger. The girl saw her rescuer clearly for the first time, saw his dark skin and white hair, recognized immediately what he must be. But rather than fleeing in terror as most would, she expressed gratitude and curiosity in equal measure, asking questions about who he was and why he lived alone on the mountain. Brunor learned of the encounter from his daughter's excited retelling, and his initial reaction combined parental fury at her recklessness with deep suspicion of the drow, who had apparently saved her life. Dwarves harbored ancient grudges against dark elves, memories of raids and betrayals that stretched back millennia. Every instinct told Brunor that this Drizzt Do'Urden, as Catti-brie reported his name, was dangerous regardless of his apparent heroism, that trusting a drow meant inviting disaster. But Catti-brie's persistent advocacy, combined with reports from others who had observed the dark elf's protective actions over recent months, planted seeds of doubt in Brunor's prejudices. The dwarf found himself in an uncomfortable position, caught between ingrained hatred of a people who had wronged his ancestors and growing evidence that this particular individual defied every stereotype about his race. The internal conflict troubled Brunor deeply, for dwarves prided themselves on loyalty to tradition and respect for ancient wisdom. Changing his mind about drow felt like betraying his heritage. The transformation in Brunor's attitude came through direct experience rather than intellectual persuasion. During a mining expedition, the dwarf encountered a remorhaz, one of those enormous polar worms whose bodies burned with internal heat intense enough to melt stone. The creature attacked with savage fury, its mandibles snapping shut on Brunor's armor and dragging him toward its mouth. Death seemed certain, for Brunor fought alone, and the Remorhaz possessed strength beyond any single warrior's ability to overcome. Then Drizzt appeared, moving with speed that made him seem to flicker through space rather than traverse it normally. His scimitars found vulnerable points in the Remorhaz's chitinous armor, drawing the creature's attention away from Brunor, while the dwarf recovered his footing and his weapon. Together, they fought with a coordination that seemed impossible for two people who had never trained together, each instinctively positioning themselves to complement the other's attacks. When the Remorhaz finally fell, bleeding from dozens of wounds, Brunor found himself standing beside a drow who had risked his life to save a dwarf he barely knew. The experience shook Brunor's certainties to their foundations. He could no longer maintain comfortable prejudices in the face of such undeniable evidence of character. This drow had chosen to help when he could have simply remained hidden, had endangered himself to protect someone who belonged to a race that hated his people. The dwarf made a decision that would have shocked his ancestors, but felt right in his bones. He extended friendship to Drizzt Do'Urden, invited him to visit Brunor's home in Lonelywood, offered to stand beside him if others challenged the Dark Elf's right to live in Icewind Dale. The friendship that developed between dwarf and drow became legendary in its own right. Spoken of in taverns and around fires as evidence that even ancient hatreds could be overcome through individual courage and willingness to see past appearances. Catti-brie, already predisposed to like the mysterious ranger who had saved her life, became a fierce advocate for Drizzt within 10 towns, her arguments slowly wearing down the resistance of those who would have preferred to drive the Dark Elf away. But acceptance did not come easily or uniformly. Roddy McGristle, that cruel bounty hunter who had pursued Drizzt since the Thistledown massacre, finally tracked his quarry to Icewind Dale. McGristle's arrival brought renewed conflict, for the bounty hunter cared nothing for truth or justice, sought only to fulfill his obsessive vendetta against the drow he held responsible for crimes actually committed by Barghists. The confrontation came to a head when McGristle attacked Drizzt in view of witnesses from 10 towns, forcing the community to choose whose version of events they would believe. Brunor's testimony proved crucial. The dwarf's reputation for honesty and his obvious friendship with Drizzt carried weight that no amount of evidence could match. When Brunor stood beside the Dark Elf and dared McGristle to go through him to reach his target, the bounty hunter's support evaporated. Those who had been willing to help hunt a supposedly dangerous drow wanted nothing to do with attacking Bruenor Battlehammer's friend. Magrisel was driven from Icewind Dale, his vendetta unfulfilled, while Drizzt gained a measure of acceptance that had seemed impossible just months earlier. Through Bruenor, Drizzt met others who would become family in all the ways that mattered. Regis, a halfling who had fled from the southern city of Calimport to escape his own complicated past, possessed a magical ruby pendant and a talent for persuasion that made him valuable despite his generally cowardly nature. The halfling accepted Drizzt with easy friendship, caring more about whether someone would share their food than what color their skin happened to be. His simple acceptance, devoid of the internal struggle Bruenor had endured, provided its own kind of affirmation. Then came Wulfgar, though his path to friendship proved rockier than the others. The young barbarian belonged to the Elk tribe, one of the groups that periodically raided 10 towns for supplies and glory. During one such raid, Bruenor captured the teenage warrior, who fought with such fierce courage that the dwarf recognized potential worth cultivating. Rather than executing Wulfgar or selling him into slavery, Bruenor claimed him as an indentured servant, intending to teach the barbarian proper dwarven values and civilized behavior. The arrangement benefited both, though neither would have admitted it initially. Wulfgar learned discipline, craftsmanship, and loyalty from Bruenor's stern tutelage. The dwarf gained an apprentice, and eventually something approaching a son. When Bruenor judged Wulfgar ready for advanced combat training, he assigned Drizzt as the young barbarian's weapons master. The drow taught Wulfgar to channel his raw strength into focused technique, to use his size and power in coordination with speed and strategy, rather than relying solely on brute force. The relationship between Drizzt and Wulfgar evolved from teacher and student to friends, and eventually to something like brothers. The barbarian, like Catti-brie before him, learned to see past heritage to character, discovered that the dark elf who trained him possessed honor that exceeded most surface dwellers. When Wulfgar's period of indenture ended, when he gained freedom to return to his tribe or seek his fortune elsewhere, he chose instead to remain with this unlikely family that had formed around a drow ranger, a dwarven smith, an adopted human daughter, and a halfling thief. These became the companions of the Hall, named for the dwarven stronghold of Mithril Hall that Bruenor dreamed of reclaiming from the monsters that had driven out his people generations earlier. They faced their first true test as a group when a weak-willed apprentice mage named Akar Kessel discovered an ancient artifact called Krencheniben, the crystal shard. The item possessed malevolent intelligence and enormous power, corrupting Kessel while amplifying his magical abilities to terrifying levels. The wizard raised an army of goblins, orcs, and other monsters, threatening to destroy 10 towns and claim dominion over all of Icewind Dale. The companions stood at the center of the defense, their individual skills complementing each other in ways that made the whole far greater than the sum of its parts. Drizzt used his stealth and knowledge of tactics to gather intelligence about Kessel's forces and coordinate defensive strategies. Bruenor led the town's warriors with a dwarf's natural talent for defensive warfare. Regis employed his ruby pendant to convince 10 towns, often fractious leaders, to work together, rather than fighting separately and dying individually. Wulfgar traveled to the barbarian tribes, using his status to convince them to join the fight, rather than taking advantage of 10 towns' weakness. The final confrontation with Aker Kessel tested them all to their limits. Drizzt infiltrated the wizard's crystalline tower, Crishal Tirith, raised through demonic power to serve as Kessel's fortress. Gwennyfar fought at his side as they battled through orcs, trolls, and magical constructs that guarded the approaches to Kessel's throne room. The wizard, drunk on power and mad with the crystal shard's influence, proved a formidable opponent whose magical abilities exceeded anything Drizzt had faced since leaving Menzoberranzan. But Kessel's power was borrowed, his will subsumed by the artifact that claimed to serve him. When the tower fell, brought down through combined efforts of all the companions and the warriors of 10 towns, Crenshinibin shattered along with its wielder's ambitions. The victory cemented the companions' reputation throughout Icewind Dale and beyond. Songs were sung of their deeds, tales told of how a drow ranger and his unlikely friends had saved the 10 towns from destruction. For Drizzt, the victory meant something even more profound than recognition or glory. He had found family, genuine family, bound not by blood, but by choice and shared experience. These people knew what he was and loved him anyway, stood beside him not despite his heritage, but because of his character. Bruenor's gruff affection, Catti-brie's fierce loyalty, Wulfgar's brotherly companionship, Regis's simple acceptance. All of it combined to heal wounds that had festered since he watched Zaknafine die in that horrible chapel beneath House Do'Urden. The legend of Drizzt Do'Urden had truly begun, spreading across the north and eventually throughout Faerun itself. People spoke of the dark elf who chose light, the drow who rejected evil, the ranger whose principles never wavered regardless of cost or consequence. Bards composed songs about his adventures. Scholars wrote treatises analyzing what his existence meant for understanding the nature of good and evil, whether heritage determined destiny or choice defined character. But for Drizzt himself, standing on Kelvin's cairn and looking out across Icewind Dale with Gwennyfar at his side and friends waiting in the towns below, the legend mattered less than the simple truth it represented. He had escaped the darkness. He had survived isolation and persecution. He had proven that Zaknafine's faith was not misplaced, that a drow could walk in light despite being born in shadow. The journey from Menzoberranzan to Icewind Dale had cost him nearly everything. He had lost his father twice, had compromised his principles in ways that still haunted his dreams, had killed his own people in service to survival. The weight of those losses never fully lifted. The guilt never completely faded. But he had also gained something precious beyond measure, something that justified every sacrifice and every struggle. He had gained the freedom to choose who he would be, to define himself by his actions, rather than accepting definitions imposed by birth or circumstance. He walked his own path, followed his own conscience, answered to no authority except the voice of his own heart, and the principles Zaknafine had taught him in whispered conversations decades ago. The surface world proved neither paradise nor nightmare, but a place where both existed alongside each other, where beauty and ugliness shared space, where kindness and cruelty competed for dominance in individual hearts. Drizzt chose kindness, chose protection over predation, chose light over shadow with every decision he made. The fact that this choice required constant effort, that circumstances repeatedly tested his principles and tempted him toward easier paths, only made the choice more meaningful. Standing on that mountain with open sky above and friends below, Drizzt Do'Urden finally understood what Zaknafine had tried to tell him in that practice chamber so many years ago. Freedom was not a destination, but a journey, not a state of being, but a series of choices. Every day presented new opportunities to reaffirm your principles or abandon them, to act according to your beliefs or compromise them for convenience. And every day, for the rest of his long life, Drizzt would make the same choice his father had died, believing he could make. He would choose light, would defend the innocent, would stand against injustice, would prove that even in the deepest darkness, hope could survive. The legend would continue. Adventures yet to come that would test him in new ways and force him to defend his principles against threats, both external and internal. But whatever challenges lay ahead, Drizzt faced them with certainty that made doubt impossible. He had escaped the Underdark's embrace. He had walked a luminous path from the depths of evil to the heights of heroism. He had become living proof that heritage does not determine destiny. That choice matters more than circumstance. That love and friendship and principle can triumph even in a world that seems designed to crush such fragile things. And that, in the end, was enough. Thank you for joining me on this journey through Drizzt Do'Urden's escape from the Underdark and his transformation into one of the surface world's greatest heroes. Until next time, may your own path be luminous, and may you always have the courage to choose who you will be rather than accepting who others say you must become.